The party was in full swing. Laughter echoed off the walls, glasses clinked together, and the air was thick with excitement. People were mingling, talking about everything from work to the latest gossip. It was supposed to be just another casual gathering at my house, a celebration of life, of friends, of moments shared. But then, the door opened. I didn't hear it at first. The music was too loud, the conversations too busy. But then, there was a shift in the room. A sudden, almost imperceptible change. People stopped talking, their attention drawn to the door. I turned my head, wondering what had caused this strange quiet. And then I saw him. It was him. Jake. I had not seen him in years, and yet, there he was, standing in the doorway as though nothing had changed. He was taller than I remembered, more confident perhaps, but the shock on my face couldn't hide the turmoil inside. I froze, feeling my heart pound. Why was he here? How did he even know about this party? The room was still. People were staring, but no one moved. It wasn't just his presence that stunned everyone, it was the weight of the moment. The last time anyone had seen Jake, things had been complicated. There was history, there was pain. But most of all, there were unanswered questions. What was he doing here? And why now, after all this time? The silence seemed to stretch on forever. No one dared to speak. I felt my breath catch in my throat as Jake slowly made his way into the room, his eyes scanning over the people like he was looking for someone specific. He wasn't smiling, but there was a certain calmness to him, an air of inevitability. My eyes instinctively moved across the room to my sister, Emma. She was standing by the window, her back slightly turned, but I could see the way her body stiffened the moment she saw him. Her expression changed, but she didn't move. She didn't acknowledge him. She couldn't. Not in front of everyone. A part of me wanted to run up to him and demand answers, but the other part, the part that had spent years trying to bury the past, wanted to just turn away and pretend I hadn't seen him. That he hadn't come back. But deep down, I knew that wasn't an option. Jake stopped in front of the crowd, his eyes finally settling on me. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there for a moment, his gaze locked on mine. It was as if he was waiting for me to say something. Or perhaps it was just the shock that had left me speechless. But I didn't have to say anything. Someone else did. You're here? Emma's voice broke the silence, and suddenly, it was as though the whole room exhaled, collectively realizing they could breathe again. But her words were sharp, edged with something I couldn't place. Jake's eyes flicked to her, and I could see the tension building between them. It was palpable. It was raw. Yeah, Jake said, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't identify. He glanced around at the faces staring at him. I'm here. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People exchanged glances, uncertain about what was going to happen next. Some were curious, others uneasy, and a few looked like they had no idea who Jake was, or why he mattered at all. But they would soon find out. Why didn't you tell me? Emma's voice quivered with a mix of disbelief and hurt. She took a small step forward, her fingers gripping the edge of her drink tightly, as though holding onto something real in a world that suddenly felt far too surreal. Jake didn't answer immediately. His eyes softened, and I could see the old guilt and regret there, even if he was trying to hide it behind a calm exterior. But Emma wasn't having any of it. After everything, you just show up here like nothing happened, she demanded, her voice now louder, more accusing. The room seemed to tighten around us, everyone leaning in to hear the conversation. They were waiting for the drama to unfold, the reason behind the years of silence. I felt a knot form in my stomach, knowing where this was headed. I knew that the past wasn't something we could bury anymore. It was about to surface in a way we never expected. You have a lot of questions, Emma, Jake said quietly, his eyes flicking to me for a brief moment. Then, as if deciding to address the crowd, he added, but maybe it's time you all knew the truth." The room fell even quieter. A few people exchanged confused glances, unsure of what he meant. But I understood. I could feel my pulse quicken as the reality of what was happening started to settle in. This wasn't just about Emma. This wasn't just about the years of silence between them. This wasn't even about me and the lingering hurt I had tried so hard to forget. This was about something far bigger. And whatever it was going to change everything. "I didn't come here to explain myself," Jake continued, his eyes briefly locking with mine. "I came because it's time for the truth to be known. And I owe you all more than just answers. I owe you the reality of what's been kept hidden for far too long." My heart skipped a beat. I knew he was about to reveal something that could shatter the lives of everyone in this room. There was no turning back now. Emma's face drained of color as she stared at him, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake stood up straighter, his jaw set, and the weight of his words hung in the air. "I know you all think you know the story. But you don't. Not yet. I'm here to finish it." At that moment, I could feel all eyes on me. The room was waiting for me to react, but I couldn't. The words that Jake had just spoken had struck me deep, and for the first time in years, I felt the old fear, the old anxiety flood my chest. What truth was he about to tell? Why had he come back now? And most importantly, what did it mean for us all? The silence that followed Jake's words was heavy, like a storm waiting to break. I could feel the weight of the room's collective gaze on me, the tension unbearable. I didn't know what to say or do. The last thing I had expected was for Jake to walk into my home after all these years, especially with some cryptic message about the truth. But here he was, and my life, our lives, were about to change in a way I couldn't comprehend. Emma's face was pale, her hands trembling around her glass. She didn't speak immediately. Her eyes were locked on Jake, but it was clear that she was struggling with the emotions churning inside her. Anger, betrayal, disbelief, and maybe, just maybe, fear. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but the words felt lodged in my throat. I had no idea what Jake was about to reveal. Whatever it was, I knew it was big, too big to ignore. "Jake, please," Emma finally spoke, her voice quivering. "What are you talking about? What truth?" Jake took a deep breath and moved toward the center of the room. His every step was deliberate, measured, as if he knew he was about to break open something that could never be put back together. Everyone watched him, waiting for him to continue. I could see the fear in Emma's eyes, and it made my heart ache. For years, we had all tried to move on, to pretend that things had happened the way they had to. But now Jake was here, like an unwelcome ghost from the past, bringing with him a storm of emotions and questions that none of us were ready to face. "Don't you want to know why I left?" Jake asked, his voice calm but heavy with regret. "Don't you want to know why I disappeared without a word?" Emma shook her head slowly, as though she couldn't believe what was happening. "You left us without a trace, Jake," she whispered. "Without a word, without any explanation. After everything we had been through. You just disappeared." His eyes softened at her words, but there was no denying the bitterness that lingered in the air between them. "I didn't have a choice," Jake said quietly, his gaze shifting to me again. "But I'm not here to explain myself. I'm here to give you the truth. The truth that none of you know. The truth that no one wanted to hear." "What truth?" I finally spoke, my voice breaking the silence. "What could possibly justify leaving us all in the dark for years?" Jake's gaze lingered on me for a long moment before he answered. "The truth about what happened the night I left. And the truth about why I was forced to go." I felt a chill run down my spine. I had been hoping to avoid this conversation, hoping that whatever reason Jake had for disappearing would remain buried forever. But now it was clear. The past was coming back, and it was coming for all of us. Years ago, Jake began, his voice steady now, I made a choice that changed everything. And it wasn't a choice I wanted to make. But I had to. I had to protect all of you, even if it meant leaving. I could feel the room shift. Everyone was listening, hanging on his every word. The air was thick with anticipation, but I could sense the underlying fear in everyone's eyes. We all knew that whatever Jake was about to say would be difficult to hear. I didn't just leave to get away from you, Emma, Jake continued, his voice cracking slightly. I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because I couldn't stay. The things I was involved in, they were dangerous. Too dangerous. And I couldn't put any of you at risk. I knew I had to go. It was the only way. Emma took a step back, her hands still shaking. She was trying to process what he was saying, but the words didn't make sense to her. What do you mean, too dangerous? What were you involved in, Jake? Jake hesitated, then took a deep breath. I was part of something bigger than I ever realized. I didn't know at first, but eventually, I found out that the people I was working with weren't just regular people. They had connections, resources. And they had plans that went far beyond anything I could have imagined. The room was silent, everyone hanging on his every word. No one spoke. They were all waiting for the next part, the part that would explain everything. I wasn't just some guy off the street, Jake said, his voice low. I had been recruited. But it wasn't what I thought it was. It wasn't just a job. It was something dangerous. The organization I was working with, they were involved in things I couldn't get out of. And when I found out what they were really up to, I knew I couldn't stay. Emma stepped forward now, her expression torn between anger and confusion. You're telling me you were working for some shady group all these years? And you didn't think to tell us? You didn't think we deserved to know? Jake looked down, guilt washing over him. I never wanted you to get involved in any of it. I wanted to keep you safe, Emma. I thought if I left, you would never have to know. But that was a mistake. I should have told you the truth. I felt my stomach twist. The air felt heavy, as though the room was closing in on me. This wasn't just about Jake leaving. It was about something bigger, something much darker that none of us had seen coming. I could feel the tension building again, but I had to know. I had to ask the question that had been gnawing at me ever since Jake walked through that door. Why now, Jake? I asked, my voice trembling. Why come back after all this time? What changed? Jake's eyes shifted to me, and I could see the sorrow in them. Because they're coming for me. They're coming for all of us. And I need to make things right before it's too late. At that moment, I felt the air around me shift once more. There it was. The truth that Jake had been hiding all these years. He wasn't just a man on the run. He was running from something far more dangerous than we had ever realized. The people I worked for, Jake continued, they've been looking for me ever since I left. I thought I could escape them, but I was wrong. They found me. And now, they want to finish what they started. The room was dead quiet. Everyone was frozen, processing what he had just said. I couldn't believe it. None of us could. But as much as I wanted to deny it, I knew deep down that Jake was telling the truth. The past had come back with a vengeance, and we were all caught in its grip. The words, "They're coming for us," hung in the air like a shadow. We sat there, stunned, each of us processing Jake's revelation in our own way. The past had come back, not as a distant memory, but as a living, breathing nightmare that was now at our doorstep. Jake, the man we thought we knew, the one we had trusted, had been hiding secrets that could destroy everything. And yet, here he was, trying to make it right before it was too late. I looked at Emma, whose face was drained of color. She was trembling, her eyes distant as she stared at Jake. Her thoughts, I could tell, were a whirlwind. She had never asked for any of this. She never knew about the danger Jake had been carrying all these years. And now, it was her turn to decide, trust him again, or let go of the person who had once been everything to her. Jake, Emma whispered, what do you mean, they're coming for us? What are you really talking about? Jake took a long breath, leaning back in his chair. He looked like a man who had already been through hell, yet somehow, he still carried the weight of something far heavier. He turned to Emma, his face hardening as he spoke. They've been watching me. Every move I make, every person I meet. They don't just let go of their own that easily. You're not just collateral damage, Emma. But you're not safe either. Not as long as you're tied to me. A chill ran down my spine. The implications of what Jake was saying were too big, too terrifying to ignore. I looked at Emma. Her face had gone pale, and her lips trembled as she tried to absorb everything. But I wasn't sure if she could. No one could. You can't protect us, Jake, Emma finally said, her voice sharp with frustration. You can't just show up out of nowhere and drop all this on us, and expect everything to go back to normal. You disappeared for years. Do you have any idea what that did to us? To me? Her voice cracked, and I could see the tears brimming in her eyes. The pain she had carried for so long was finally pouring out. She had never gotten closure, never understood why Jake had left without a word, without a trace. Jake's face softened, and for a moment, he looked like the person I had once known. But the hardness in his eyes didn't fade. I know, Emma, he said quietly, I know what I did was wrong. And I can't change that. But the people I was involved with, they don't forget. And I'm sorry. I never wanted you to be dragged into this. A heavy silence filled the room. It was the kind of silence that only comes when everything that can be said has already been said. And now, all that was left was to face the consequences. But I wasn't ready to sit in the silence any longer. There was one question that burned in my mind, one thing I needed to know. Who are these people, Jake? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Who are they, and why are they after you? Jake hesitated before answering, his gaze flickering toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. They're not just anyone, he said slowly. They're part of a covert operation, something so deep and far-reaching, most people would never even know it existed. They have power, resources, connections. They don't just work with governments, they control them. They manipulate events from behind the scenes, and they get what they want. At any cost. I felt the room grow colder as Jake spoke. His words weren't just ominous, they were chilling. Emma's face turned to stone, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was trying to make sense of it all, but how could she? How could any of us? So, you're telling me, Emma said slowly, that these people are part of some shadow operation? And you're their target? What, they want to kill you? Jake's eyes locked onto hers, his expression hardening again. It's not about killing me. It's about control. And they won't stop until they have it. They already know who I am, where I've been, what I've done. But they're after something bigger now. They think I know something, something that could ruin them. Emma's face twisted in confusion. What could you possibly know that would ruin them? Jake didn't answer immediately. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the world beyond as if it were no longer his own. He seemed far away, lost in thought. I could feel the tension building. Whatever he was holding back, it was big. Bigger than anything we had imagined. I know who they really are, Jake said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. I know their true agenda. And I know what they plan to do next. I could feel the weight of his words press down on me. The truth was unraveling, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear it. What do they want? I asked, my voice hoarse. Jake turned to us, his eyes intense. They want to start a war. A war that will change everything. They've been pushing things for years, manipulating governments, controlling markets, causing chaos. All to bring the world to the brink of collapse. They want to seize control in the midst of the chaos. And I have proof of it. The silence that followed was suffocating. We were in the eye of a storm, and we didn't even realize how deep it ran until it was almost too late. "Jake," I whispered, my heart racing. "What do you want from us?" Jake's face softened again. But it was fleeting. "I don't want you involved in this," he said. "But I need your help. I need to make sure they don't win. I need to expose them before it's too late." "Expose them?" Emma repeated, her voice incredulous. "Jake, we're not equipped for this. We're not equipped to go up against people like that." "I know," Jake replied, his eyes searching hers. "But we have no choice. If we don't stop them, they will take everything. And they'll make sure no one ever finds out what they did." I could feel my hands trembling now. This wasn't just some small-time operation Jake had stumbled into. This was a web of deceit, manipulation, and power. The kind of thing that could take down entire nations, let alone a few unsuspecting people. "Jake," I said softly, "how do you plan to stop them?" Jake took a deep breath, then looked at us with a sense of determination in his eyes. "I don't know yet. But I'm going to find a way. I've spent the last few years gathering information, digging into their operations. I'm getting close. But I need your help to make sure they don't silence me before I can finish." My mind was racing. This was bigger than anything we had ever imagined. We were no longer just talking about betrayal and lost love. We were talking about a global conspiracy, one that could change everything if we didn't act fast. I looked at Emma, who was still processing it all. Her face was a mask of confusion, fear, and anger. But beneath it, I could see the spark of something else, something deeper. She wanted to protect her family, and even if she didn't fully understand everything that Jake was saying, she wasn't going to let him face this alone. I didn't know what to think anymore. All I knew was that our lives had been turned upside down. The past had come rushing back with a vengeance, and now we were all caught in its grasp. The choices we made next would define everything. The storm outside had grown fiercer. Wind howled against the windows, rattling the glass, but it wasn't the storm that kept me awake. It was everything Jake had revealed. The power he spoke of, the shadowy figures controlling it all, my mind couldn't grasp the scope of it. But every word Jake had said planted a seed of terror, and the worst part? It felt too real. The danger wasn't some abstract fear anymore. It was standing right in front of us. I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. Beside me, Emma tossed and turned. I could tell she was awake too. The silence between us was heavy with the weight of our unspoken fears. "You think he's telling the truth?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper, but I heard it clearly. There was no escape from the gravity of the situation now. "I don't know," I said, turning toward her. "It sounds insane, doesn't it? A global conspiracy? But I can't shake the feeling that Jake isn't lying. There's something in his eyes. Something he's not telling us." Emma let out a shaky breath. "If he's telling the truth, we're in more danger than we ever imagined." I didn't answer right away. What could I say? She was right. If Jake's warning was real, we were standing on the edge of something far darker than we ever expected. But what could we do? How could we fight something we didn't even understand? The next morning, Jake was gone. I woke up to find the house eerily quiet. The sun was rising, casting pale light through the curtains, but the emptiness in the house was suffocating. Emma was already up, standing by the window, her face pale and drawn. "He left," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He didn't even say goodbye. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Jake had promised to stay, to make things right, to keep us safe. But now? Now, he had vanished. And I had no idea what that meant. Do you think he's gone for good? I asked, trying to keep the panic from creeping into my voice. Emma shook her head, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. I don't know. But I don't think he left because he wanted to. I think something happened. Something worse. I felt the same. Jake's disappearance wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. The world he had dragged us into was too dangerous, and now he had disappeared without a trace. The questions that haunted me last night now seemed even more pressing. Who was Jake really running from? Who were these people he had gotten tangled up with? As the day wore on, we did what we could to keep ourselves occupied, to pretend things were normal. But the tension in the air never lifted. And every time I checked the phone, every time the doorbell rang, my heart skipped a beat. By the evening, the doorbell did ring. But this time, it wasn't Jake. It was the men in black suits. 3 of them. They were standing on the porch, their faces cold and unreadable. One of them held a briefcase in his hand, the edges sharp and pristine, as though it had never been touched. My heart sank as I recognized the look in their eyes. It wasn't just the cold stare of men who were here to ask questions. No, these men were here to make a statement. And I had no doubt in my mind that the statement would be anything but friendly. We need to speak with Jake, one of them said, his voice low and measured. He's not here, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Do you have any idea where he is? The man's eyes flickered for just a second, a brief hesitation. But it was enough. It was enough to make my blood run cold. We're asking the questions here, another man said, his tone sharp and final. Now, we'll ask again. Where is Jake? I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading. The reason I had started to feel the walls closing in. The reason I hadn't been able to sleep, to think clearly. I was caught in something bigger than I had ever imagined. And these men weren't just looking for Jake. They were looking for all of us. He's not here, Emma repeated, stepping in front of me. Her voice was trembling, but there was a steel in her eyes now that hadn't been there before. The men exchanged a quick look, and I could see the calculation in their eyes. They knew we were hiding something, but we weren't going to give in so easily. Then we'll ask you again, the first man said, his tone turning more threatening. Where is Jake? I knew we couldn't keep lying to them. Not with the way they were looking at us. But I also knew that telling them anything would only make things worse. So I did the only thing I could think of. I don't know, I said, keeping my voice steady. He disappeared. I haven't heard from him in days. The men seemed to consider this for a moment, and then the one holding the briefcase stepped forward. He opened it slowly, revealing a set of photographs. My heart stopped when I saw them. They were photos of Jake, but they were different. These weren't just ordinary pictures. These were surveillance photos, taken from angles that suggested they had been watching him for a long time. There were pictures of Jake in various locations, outside a cafe, walking through a park, talking to someone in an alleyway. But the most unsettling part? In every one of the photos, Jake's expression was the same, tense, nervous, as if he knew he was being watched. You don't have to lie, the man said coldly. We know where he's been. We know who he's been talking to. And now, we need to know what he's hiding. Emma and I exchanged a look. The truth was, we had no idea what Jake was hiding. We only knew what he had told us, and even that didn't seem to explain everything. But now, with these men standing here, with their eyes burning holes into us, I realized how little we actually knew about Jake's past. The man continued, his voice low and almost mocking. You've been involved in something much bigger than you realize. You've had a front row seat to a conspiracy that could change the world. And if you want to survive, you'll start talking. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? They weren't interested in the truth. They wanted something else. Something I wasn't sure I could give them. One of the other men stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Emma. You're not in this alone. If you cooperate, we'll make sure you're protected. But if you continue to lie, if you continue to stand in our way, things will get much worse. Emma's face was set in a grim expression, but I could see the fear in her eyes. It was the same fear I felt, crawling under my skin, making it hard to breathe. But before any of us could say anything, a loud bang echoed from the other side of the door. The men froze. And in that moment, I knew that whatever had been planned for us, it was about to escalate. The loud bang from the door startled everyone in the room. It wasn't the kind of noise you'd expect from a normal knock or a doorbell. This was a forceful crash, someone or something was breaking in. My heart pounded in my chest, and for the briefest moment, the world seemed to slow down. Stay back, one of the men in the black suits shouted, as the other two reached for their weapons. But I barely registered that detail. My eyes were fixed on the door, my mind racing. Emma grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. What are we going to do? I didn't know. I couldn't know. I was frozen in place, a part of me refusing to believe that our nightmare was escalating this quickly. It felt like we had crossed some invisible line, and there was no turning back. The door cracked open. It wasn't the kind of break you'd expect if someone had simply kicked it down, it was controlled. A deliberate force meant to open, not destroy. But the force behind it was undeniable. A man stood in the doorway, taller than the others, his face partially obscured by the shadows. His cold eyes, however, were visible, and I could tell instantly that this was no ordinary man. Move aside, the newcomer said in a voice that seemed to command attention without effort. The men in black suits didn't hesitate. They stepped aside, almost as if they recognized him. Or were afraid of him. Emma and I exchanged a glance, the panic in both our faces palpable. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I wanted to scream, to run, but every instinct in my body told me to stay still and figure out what was happening before it was too late. The tall man stepped forward, his boots clicking sharply against the floor as he approached us. He held a briefcase in one hand, much like the other men, but it was different. It wasn't just a normal briefcase, it was sleek, metallic, and didn't look like anything we'd seen before. It was almost futuristic. And that only made the situation feel more surreal. Who are you? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer right away. He simply studied me, his gaze unwavering. It was like he was waiting for something, an admission, perhaps. An understanding that I had no choice but to surrender. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he finally spoke. You don't know who I am, do you? I shook my head. No. And frankly, I don't care. I hated how weak my voice sounded, but it was all I could muster. I wanted to demand answers, to fight back, but everything in the room felt off, wrong. The energy shifted as the man took another step closer, his eyes piercing through me. The truth will be clearer soon enough, he said, his tone calm, almost too calm. But it's not you who should be worried. Who are you working for? Emma blurted out, her voice trembling but defiant. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned slightly to glance at the men in black suits, who were now standing quietly behind him. They, too, seemed to be waiting for his next move. I don't work for anyone, he replied finally. His voice turning icy. I am the one people work for. I could feel the chill in his words as they settled into the room, and suddenly, it was like the temperature had dropped. I realized just then that this man was no ordinary person. His presence alone was enough to send a shiver down my spine, a feeling I couldn't ignore. The moment seemed to stretch on forever as the man watched us carefully, almost as if he were reading our minds. And just as I thought I couldn't bear the silence any longer, he finally spoke again. "You think you're in control, don't you?" he said to Emma, his eyes narrowing. "You think that because Jake is gone, you've escaped. That you can go back to your ordinary lives." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "But you're wrong," he continued, his voice now dripping with contempt. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourselves into." I felt my breath catch in my throat. I had no idea what he meant. No idea what was coming next. The only thing I knew for certain was that whatever we were involved in was far beyond anything we had imagined. Emma opened her mouth to say something, but the man held up a hand, silencing her. "It's too late for questions," he said coldly. "You've already seen too much. You've already heard things that will never let you go." I could hear the finality in his words. And then it hit me, he wasn't just threatening us. He was telling us that we were already trapped in this mess. That there was no going back, no undoing the damage. "You don't have to be afraid," he added, his expression softening just slightly. "Not if you cooperate. We can protect you. But that depends on how you handle this next part." I couldn't make sense of his words. What next part? What was happening? Why were we suddenly in this strange game of survival, and what did it have to do with Jake? "You don't know who we are," he continued, almost as if he were speaking to himself now. "You don't know the true power that lies behind all of this." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my fear. "What do you want from us?" The man's eyes flicked to the briefcase he was holding, and then he stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the weight of his stare. "Your story is about to change," he said, his voice low. "You'll see soon enough. You'll see how deep the rabbit hole goes." I looked at Emma, whose face was as pale as mine. We were both trapped, cornered by a reality that didn't make sense. And with each word the man spoke, it felt like we were sinking further and further into a world we could never understand. Suddenly, the man reached into his briefcase and pulled out something small. A device, no larger than a phone, with a glowing screen. He tapped it twice, and the room filled with a low hum. "What is that?" I asked, a sense of dread creeping up my spine. "This," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "is the key to everything." Before I could respond, the hum intensified. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. The man held up the device, now flashing with a series of numbers. "This is the first step. Once you understand it, you'll understand everything." I looked at Emma, and she looked at me, both of us silently agreeing that whatever was happening, we weren't prepared for it. This wasn't a normal situation. We were up against something bigger than we could fight, something that involved forces we couldn't even begin to comprehend. The man didn't wait for a reply. Instead, he turned to the men in black suits and nodded. Without a word, they moved to the door. "You have 1 week," he said, his voice calm but heavy with warning. "If you don't figure it out by then, we'll be back." And just like that, they were gone. The silence that followed was deafening. The ticking of the clock was all I could hear as the heavy silence hung in the air. It felt like the world had paused for a moment, just long enough for us to catch our breath. Emma and I sat at the table, neither of us moving, both of us trapped in the same unnerving reality. We had 1 week. A week to figure out something that could change everything. I glanced over at her, and she met my gaze. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else there too. Determination. We had both been forced into this web of lies, and now it was up to us to break free. But how? Where could we even begin? How are we going to figure this out? Emma whispered, her voice hoarse. "I don't know," I admitted, my heart sinking. "But we can't just sit here and wait for them to come back." Emma stood up, pacing the small living room, her mind clearly racing. We need answers. We need to know who they are and why they're doing this to us. The urgency in her voice mirrored my own thoughts. The man in black had said we didn't understand what we were up against. And I had no doubt he was right. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized we had to start somewhere. We couldn't afford to wait. I'll go through the papers again, I said, standing up. Maybe there's something we missed. Emma stopped pacing and looked at me. You think we're going to find something? After everything that's happened, do you think there's a piece of paper that'll make it all make sense? I don't know, I replied, running a hand through my hair. But it's all we have. We need a starting point. As the days passed, we fell into a routine. I pored over every document we had, old letters, papers from the briefcase the man had shown us, even the ones that seemed meaningless at first. Emma searched online, scouring through databases, trying to find any trace of the men in black or the mysterious briefcase. We even reached out to a few trusted friends for help, but nobody could give us the answers we so desperately needed. And yet, as the clock ticked down, the weight of what we had discovered started to sink in. We weren't just dealing with some shady organization. This was bigger than anything we had ever imagined. The deeper we dug, the more we realized that the man in black, the briefcase, the numbers, it was all part of something far more dangerous, something that reached beyond us. The night before the deadline, I couldn't sleep. The room was too quiet, the stillness too heavy. Every second seemed like an eternity. I got up and walked over to the table where the papers were scattered, then ran my fingers over the documents, tracing the numbers and symbols that seemed to hold no meaning. But one document caught my eye. It was a map. But not a map of any place I recognized. It was a map of the world, but there were strange markings on it, symbols, dots, and lines that didn't make sense. My pulse quickened as I realized the map wasn't just a map, it was a blueprint. A blueprint for something. Something huge. I called Emma over. Look at this. She came over and stared at the map, her eyes narrowing in concentration. What is this? I don't know, I said, the realization creeping in. But this could be the key. This might be what they were talking about. We stared at the map for a long time, the tension thick in the air. There was no way to tell exactly what it meant, but there was no denying that it was important. That much was clear. We need to find out where these places are, Emma said quietly. I agree, I said, feeling the weight of what we had to do next. But we don't have much time. We need to figure this out before they come back. The clock was ticking, and we had no idea how close we were to the truth. It was almost as if we were playing a game that we didn't understand the rules to, with forces at play that we couldn't see. But we couldn't stop now. By morning, we had made a decision. We were going to follow the clues on the map. Each symbol, each line, each dot seemed to lead to something important. We packed what little we could and left for the first location on the map, a small, remote town far from the city, deep in the countryside. The drive was long, filled with anticipation and a growing sense of unease. As we approached the town, the landscape changed. The roads narrowed, and the air seemed to grow heavier. Emma and I exchanged silent glances, both of us feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. We arrived at the first location by late afternoon. It was a small building, tucked away on the edge of the town. The building looked old, abandoned even, with boarded-up windows and a door that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But the map didn't lie. This was the place. We got out of the car, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was as if the building was alive, breathing in the silence around it. There was no sign of anyone, no guards, no cars in the parking lot. But we knew better than to think we were alone. This is it, Emma said softly. What do we do now? We go inside, I said, my voice steady despite the fear bubbling up inside me. We approached the door, and I reached for the handle, but it was locked. I tried pushing it, but it wouldn't budge. No turning back now, I muttered, taking a deep breath. With a few quick movements, I pulled out a small lockpicking tool I'd carried with me for years. It wasn't something I used often, but I'd learned to do it in case of emergencies. And right now, this definitely qualified as an emergency. Seconds later, the door clicked open, and we stepped inside. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of dust and neglect. But there was something else too, an underlying energy, something electric in the atmosphere. We moved cautiously through the building, every footstep echoing in the emptiness. The walls were lined with old equipment, boxes stacked high, and papers scattered across the floor. But there was something in the back room that caught our attention. We approached the room, the door cracked open just enough for us to see inside. And that's when we saw it. A large machine, its surface covered in strange symbols, just like the ones on the map. The machine was humming softly, as if it were alive. It was then that everything clicked into place. The numbers, the symbols, the briefcase, the mysterious man, this was what they were trying to protect. This is it, I breathed, my voice barely a whisper. This is what they've been hiding. Before Emma could say anything, we heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind us. We turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was the tall man from before. His cold eyes locked onto ours. "I warned you," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I told you that you would understand eventually. But I never said you'd like what you found."